Welcome, everyone. I'm George Canellis from Milbank. You are in our Hudson Yards 37th floor digs. We are delighted to have you here. I want to especially welcome fellow Columbia alums. Please, this is your home. Make yourself at home. We are delighted to help sponsor this celebration and launch of the ERA project. I want to especially welcome those that we have here at the dais, including Ting and Dahlia and Professor Franke. I think Ting's going to make some introductions specific to the project and kick us off.
Thank you. Right on time. So, thank you, George. I mean, we are so grateful. Look at this incredible, fantastic stage. This is actually our very first huge event for the ERA project, and so we're so grateful to Milbank for making this happen and doing it so fabulously. And we're honored to partner with you guys in the work that we do to advance and protect gender justice. So thank you again. My name is Ting Cheng. I'm the director of the ERA project. Is this weird sounding? Sorry, this microphone.
Very weird, very weird.
Very weird. Thank you, Ron. We were founded over a year and a half ago to develop and provide expert legal guidance on the final ratification of the ERA. So, spoiler alert, our US Constitution does not have explicit gender equality protections, but we are very close, and I can credibly make an argument that we are there already. But the ERA would change that. And we're also here to think about the role of the ERA in kind of like the larger protection and expansion of gender justice in America. So I want to introduce our incredible speakers. Dahlia Lithwick, writer, thinker, podcast goddess, everyone's girl crush, really, and the author of this extraordinary new book, Lady Justice. And Katherine, Franke, writer, thinker, the professor that we all wish we had in law school, really, and some of you guys did, so lucky you. And also the founding faculty director of the Center for Gender and Sexuality Law at Columbia Law School, and also the ERA project. So thank you for... let's just have a quick check-in. How are you guys doing? How are you feeling about the democracy, the health of our nation, the midterms coming up? Like, what's front and center on your minds? Who wants to go first?
Am I on? Let's turn it on.
Hi, first of all, thank you. Thank you to Milbank, this is amazing. Thank you to Katherine and Ting for including me. It literally changes by the minute. Last week felt like a good week for justice. Occasionally we have good weeks, and then suddenly there are bad weeks. I would say the stuff that worries me, there's a lot. How much time do we have? But I think two of the things that worry me are the vigilantism that is kind of becoming a component of, if you don't like the poll watchers, why don't you go harass them? If you decide to do, I didn't know people were doing vote caging from their basements, like just sending out postcards to voters and then determining that those voters have changed. The level of self-help that is happening in terms of people who don't have trust in institutions and voting and legal institutions scares me, and I don't think we talk about it enough. I know we talked about it actually when SB 8 passed in Texas, because it is a vigilante bill, like quite literally meant to weaponize and to legalize that spirit of everyone is their own police and everyone is their own prosecutor. I think that's dangerous and that scares me. And then I think the other thing that deeply worry about is that the thing that I told my kids was, 0.8% of the population at one time. That was the statistic I used. That was really, really gunning for, women's rights, for LGBTQ rights, for the rights of refugees and immigrants. It's not, spoiler, 0.08. I mean, there's really an enormous energy and zeal for revanchism that if you had asked me 7 years ago, I really did say 0.08. So I think that the sheer number of people who are thinking in terms of dismantling institutions is chilling to me.
Well, I'm just back from 10 days in Sicily, so I'm good. I'm really good. I'm trying to hold on to that. Things are bad. They're bad in ways that I think we didn't even think they would get as worse as they keep getting worse. On the other hand, it feels like something is both broken and shaken loose. Right? We're thinking about doing work in new ways than we were before. We were in such a grip with Roe versus Wade, defending it, seeing it as the most important thing to hold on to, certainly in the reproductive rights world. But it was never that great to begin with. Right? It never delivered any kind of meaningful reproductive health care to women of color and low-income women and so many other women and other people who were pregnant. And so our legacy institutions that were doing the work of the nonprofit work of defending those rights in courts and elsewhere had such a backward-looking set of strategies of defending that kind of crummy court decision. And it was so focused on courts that we're kind of cut loose now from having to do that. And we're mobilizing people who are in horror about where things are going in new ways. So that 0.08 is a much bigger group now. And all of you are here tonight, I think, because I haven't met all of you, but I know a lot of you are also feeling pretty desperate and want to be thinking together in community. What do we do now? And so a whole lot of new stuff's on the table, including the ERA and this wonderful book, about what we ought to be doing next. And in that sense, I feel kind of free and depressed, but free.
That sense of kind of things being broken open, I think it's what your book represents, Dahlia. And there is a story behind the very pink cover, so I'll let you tell it. It's kind of hilarious. But when I read it, it's not a book about revolutionary women. It's not a book about women overcoming things while wearing corsets to be full citizens or to be as good as the man next to them, right? It's about women revolutionizing democracy. It's a verb. And that strikes me as kind of a different way of thinking about the world right now. So I guess I want to just ask you, what prompted you to write this book? Who is your audience? And you wrote it 4 years ago, so does it feel like you've been time traveling through some chaos? And how did you kind of reconcile the current moments with the,
It was very important to me, and Katherine's going to follow this up, to start with Pauli Murray for exactly the reason that I think you're flicking at, which is we all think that gender equality begins and ends with Ruth Bader Ginsburg, right? And we all have the mug and the hat, the throw pillow. I have 2 throw pillows. I have the earrings.
Collar?
I do not own the collar. I'm sure I could.
Holidays are coming up.
The collar is. I just think that we make this mistake.
jabot?
That's this one, yeah. I think, and we were talking about this before we started, that one of the things that worried me, that has long worried me, is that this cult of reifying one single human being who was extraordinary by every metric, but who every single time I interviewed her said, I stand on the shoulders of these unbelievable people who did all the work and I get all the credit. And she was really clear about that. And one of the people she named right up until the last time I interviewed her was Pauli Murray. And you all probably know about Pauli Murray, but I did not learn about Pauli Murray in 3 years of law school. And I covered the Supreme Court for about 14 years before I knew about Pauli Murray. So one of the things that I wanted to flip was the idea that we do democracy reform and justice reform because we pop some popcorn and, you know, watch someone else do it. And I was very, very worried for the last couple of years that there tends to be this, you know, Bob Mueller's gonna fix it, Adam Schiff is gonna fix it, you know, Merrick Garland is gonna fix it, and like my job is to like watch Netflix. And I wanted to really probe whether that's A, in service of democracy reform, and B, whether that's actually how women do democracy reform, because my experience is, as you said, it is not. It is not, we wait around for one person to fix it. So I was really, I started this book in 2017. I massively rewrote both the introduction and the epilogue in the 4 days after Dobbs came down, because I actually didn't believe, and this is where you get an I told you so, that Alito wasn't gonna massively change the leaked draft. I thought he was gonna rewrite it, because, you know, we got the law wrong and the history wrong, but I was wrong. He didn't change a word. So I really thought Dobbs was gonna be a different Dobbs on June 24th, and it was the same Dobbs. So I was massively rewriting, and I guess I would just say, you know, every chapter in this book features really at random, like I want to be very clear, every one of them is an avatar for 100 other people who I could have chosen, but I wanted to both pick up the Becca Heller at IRAP, Robbie Kaplan, who did with Karen Dunn the Charlottesville Nazi lawsuit. I wanted to just both flag that we all remember that stuff, because those were amazing wins, and that maybe they're a roadmap to future wins, and that actually Donald Trump was the losingest president in history, and we forget that too. And so it was a way of both saying every one of these people that I profiled does power really differently. Every one of them, and I know we're going to talk about them, this has a really different relationship to the law itself. Some of them are much more dubious than maybe the three of us about law being the instrument of change. But I think I just wanted to tell a story, again rooted in Pauline Murray, of how sometimes the people who get famous are not the people who do all the work, and sometimes the people who do all the work are the people who get famous. And maybe most urgently thinking about, you know, the last 3 chapters of the book, which are all about voting rights and gerrymandering and reapportionment and the sort of Brussels sprouts of democracy, like not the stuff that is necessarily makes for a great TikTok story of litigation, but is the stuff I think that has to happen for any of the interests that we have to be achieved. And so I needed the book to end on power, democracy reform, systems, and not just this fantasy that we have that, you know, if Ruth Bader Ginsburg just wins 3 more cases, we're saved. Because A, she's not around, but B, cases isn't enough. We have to do massive structural reform, which is, I think, what you guys are thinking about.
So speaking of Becca Heller, in your book, she says, you know, I'm all about using the master's tools, right, to dismantle the master's. But like, and then when we talk about power, it's kind of like, if I were to ask you, does the law create cultural change? Does culture influence law in a meaningful way? I think you guys would both say, not really.
Or yes.
Or yes? But okay, so parking lot that for a second, Katherine. But what I want to say is the ERA, people think is this, my grandmother's revolution, not my grandmother, I'm from China, but like somebody's grandmother's revolution. And it's your grandmother's revolution. So but it's about power. We don't, is this worth fighting for if we're just fighting for another 14th Amendment, right? It's because the 14th Amendment does not serve anyone and does not deliver justice or equality right now. We can talk more about that. But it's about what, I guess my question for you is, this is how I think about the ERA, but how do you guys think about sort of activist lawyering in the grand scheme of like social change, you know, power? Like, how do you get power? How do you use these instruments to change the rules, build another wing of the house? How do you build power?
You build power with people. You don't build power with courts. The courts follow that power. They can facilitate that power. The law is a tactic. in achieving whatever the goals are of a particular community. I teach a class on this for 1Ls, on how to do social movement lawyering. We have the dean of the CUNY Law School here, who that's what their mission is to produce social movement lawyers. I don't think it's fair to say that that is the mission of the Columbia Law School, but some of us it is. And certainly nobody stands in the way at Columbia of that mission. But what I think is so powerful about a book like this is that courts follow where the culture is going. Occasionally they lead that culture. And we have some uncomfortable examples of that. I would say Brown versus Board, and even Ruth Bader Ginsburg said that she thought Roe came too early, that it was way out ahead. She actually said that at Columbia in an interview with us, which was kind of interesting, but she felt Roe was out ahead of where the society was. And so that's our work as lawyers, as people, as citizens, or non-citizens in the society, is to make it possible for courts to do the right thing. And as part of what I love about working with Ting and our other partners here in the room is we're not only focusing on what we can make the courts do, because I actually think we need to bring a feminist approach, an ERA-based approach to how we defend and push the ERA, and not a top-down, hierarchical, patriarchal approach so that we can just get the Supreme Court to rule for us. Those rulings don't stick if they don't have some kind of traction in society more generally. And you look at, Obergefell and the same-sex marriage fight, which, if you know anything about my work, and I know a bunch of you don't, I was not a big fan of the same-sex marriage movement. I thought it was actually kind of ill-conceived in all sorts of ways. And we're seeing what's happening is that the backlash against marriage rights is largely because we relied on such a court-based strategy. And we didn't do the harder work of building the possibilities for that opinion to be taken broadly enough as the right interpretation of the Constitution, not as a specific legal matter, but a social matter. And so what I love about the book is that the enormous success you've had with this book is just so wonderful and well-deserved, is that this is moving the needle around what sex equality should look like, could look like, what its limits are with the work that we've already done, where we need to go. And so this is a brief. It's really a social brief that is parallel to and supports the other kinds of legal briefs that we write.
One of the ways I cut at this question, and I'm very curious what you both think about it, is I keep finding myself in interviews comparing the women in the book and the women in this room and the people who've been doing this work in this country to the women on the streets in Iran, who are quite literally setting things on fire, putting their bodies in the street. These are teenage girls. I mean, it is extraordinary. And the question is, what do we have access to that they don't? Because I think it's easy to say, well, that's just the Women's March, right? That's just power being expressed on the street. But I wanted the book to really probe this question of, no, we actually are not, enthralled to a bunch of clerics. Stipulated, maybe we are going to be enthralled to a bunch of clerics.
6 of them on the
Yeah, there you go, and we went there. But I think that we have these lanes that are open, whether it is litigation, whether it is political movements, whether it is organized, all of the to power, the way Mary Beard uses it, and I use it at the end of the book. That's profoundly different than having to lay your body on the street. And so I think that one of the points of entry for this question for me is, how do we explain? I very early, maybe on launch day, somebody said to me on one of the shows, this is exactly the same as what we're seeing on the streets of Iran. And I absolutely really dispute that, because we are way, way in a different place, and we have to really think about all the levers that we have access to and all the wins that we've had. And maybe the other way I would answer your question, again, I'm curious what you all think, is that if I posit, as you said, that Becca Heller is the sort of exemplar in the book of, I think she actually says the words, the law is bullshit. Words she has regretted telling me in an interview since. But and she says, I'm using the master's tools because that's what I got. But the law basically has been an engine of oppression and violence against vulnerable people since its inception. And by the way, that's what Dobbs is. It's just kind of hearkening back to that. And then the other end of the spectrum in the book is Anita Hill, who, truthfully, if anyone has a reason to say the law is bullshit, and everything I've tried to do culturally has not necessarily moved the needle in ways that she would anticipate, is the one who is most ferociously dedicated to the idea that law is the thing that stands between us and chaos. And if we allow for chaos, the people who will suffer are the people who are vulnerable. And so I just think it's whether that is down to a generational divide, that one person is white and one is a person of color, whether it's simply that Anita Hill is in a very different posture in terms of what her work is. But I think it's really a fascinating sort of, if that's the spectrum, I keep finding myself asking myself where I am on that spectrum and whether I really am, of the view that at the end of the day, in the hands of Justice Alito and Dobbs, the law can never get us where we need to be because of systemic and structural imbalance, or if at the end of the day, we're getting there. And this is a backlash, but we're gonna get there. And again, it depends, is it Tuesday? I'm in despair, but I don't, actually not Tuesday, it is Thursday. But I don't know quite where I land on that spectrum, but I think I would associate myself with Katherine's note that this isn't just about which lawsuit you won this week. And our failure as a culture that really likes law and order is that we think that the totality of this is either I won some lawsuits today or women are putting their bodies on the streets. There's a billion points between those two, and I don't think we pay enough attention to them.
Well, let's play out the notion that the ERA, let's assume that the ERA was achieved ratification in the 70s, and it came very close. Most advocates thought that it was a self-fulfilling prophecy. 30 of the 38 states needed ratified within the first year of congressional passage in 1972. So a lot of people thought that it was going to pass, no big deal. So where would we be today? This is going back to your kind of Tuesday, Thursday shift. Would we still be here with these kind of clerical zealots just destroying things with their sledgehammers? Or would we have begun to lay a foundation of something different, a more expansive version of democracy, substantive equality? We have some dignitaries here from South Africa. They do substantive equality really well in their constitution. Other people do this, it's a thing, but we don't. And so what does it mean to you guys, to you ladies, to think about something, the ERA as a principle that we can just not even think about anymore, that we can rely on?
I do a quick frame and then I'm curious what Katherine thinks. I mean, one of the things that's so striking, both about the arc of the ERA and the arc of justice that I lay out in the book, is the book kind of opens in 2016 with oral arguments in Whole Women's Health versus Hellerstedt, which was just such an astounding moment as a journalist to be like, 3 women justices, women advocates, RBG literally saying to John Roberts, stop talking, I want her to finish, and just everybody go, whoa, we've come a long way from Griswold, right? Where all these guys were afraid to name the reproductive, devices that they were like, don't say the word, nobody wants to know what the contraceptive device is here, shh.
You think they'd say it now?
Well, I think some of them would say it, and I think certainly, the idea to me of moving in my lifetime from a bunch of men determining how equality and gender and women's bodies and privacy work, and getting to Hellerstedt and being like, oh, there are women in the room. And Justice Breyer, for all that you can find flaws in his analysis, I think women are eminently visible to him in that opinion. You know, they are lived lives. So we're that close, right? That close. And then here we are, just a few years later, and we've moved absolutely irrevocably, it feels like, away from that, which is exactly the arc that you're describing with the ERA, where you're that close, and then some backlash thing happens and it hits so hard. And by the way, there's a valence of religion that happens in both instances that I think we have to name and reckon with. And so I think that there's just there's one of two ways to tell the story. And then I do want to hear if Katherine thinks, you know, in your counterfactual, we'd be in a different place. But I would just say, I do think we forget that there are backlashes. And, you know, you talked about the backlash to Obergefell, and we have to think about, you know, you can never predict what that's going to look like. You can't predict what form it's going to take. You also can't be afraid of it, I think. And maybe most pointedly, you know, I was thinking about this in reference to, you know, the New York Times polling on, the New York Times article yesterday that showed, you know, whatever advantage women had post-Dobbs is gone, women don't care, there's no, you know, whatever happened in Kansas was a one-off, and women now are back to worrying about gas prices. You had your moment and it's over. And I think that polling is flawed, but I think that there's a way in which there's this deep temptation to say, if we rooted this in equality, right? If we hadn't rooted it in, you know, privacy or whatever else, if we had the ERA, if we had a culture that thought about this in terms of equality and dignity, we wouldn't be here. And I get the temptation to rewrite history using the counterfactual, but I feel like there's a way in which the inevitability of the backlash tells me we might still be in this moment just facing a backlash about notions of equality. And so I guess maybe I want to fight the hypo a tiny bit, because it feels to me that it's always a way of saying, no matter what you did, you would have failed, and it was on you to do something that didn't engender a backlash. And I just think that's a really disempowering way to talk about history.
Well, as we all know and we learn, I think in the first year of law school, the Constitution is not self-executing. Right, it needs to be interpreted and enforced, and meaning needs to be poured into it. And so we have explicit rights to counsel in the Constitution, we have rights to due process, to a whole range of things that don't actually mean that much for many people. So getting the actual words in the Constitution is necessary but not sufficient. So what movement does that then spark? And I think if there's a critique that I know we both share of some of the places where the organizers and the movement for gender-based justice is right now, it's by focusing too much on legal solutions, on just getting the words in the Constitution, or getting the right people on the court, or getting the right statute passed, without thinking about, well, then what work will that do? And that's so much of what Ting and I do with the ERA project, is not only think about what are the next strategic moves we need to make in order to move a bill in Congress, or to get more states to ratify and to get these words into the Constitution, but then 10 years, 15, 20 years down the road, what work will that language do? And you know, it's also true that the Constitution doesn't include explicit race equality protections either. And it's one of the cool things about New York State, is that the New York State legislature just passed a very broad equal rights amendment that included sex, race, pregnancy outcome, sexual orientation, gender identity, disability, a whole list of protected categories. It has to pass a second session of the legislature, and then goes on the ballot, hopefully in 2024 in New York State. And it's a wonderful model of how to think a little bit more organically, but again, it won't execute itself. It's on us to then make it do some work in the world. And it's part of why we like to do these sorts of events, is also to hear from you. Like, what kind of sex equality would you like to see? What would you like this language to do? What in your work could this language in the Constitution, or some fabulous new statute, do in making your life different, or making the life of your kids or others different? But that's the harder stuff in a way, I think, is getting those statutes, those provisions in the Constitution to do actual work. And I just feel enormously privileged to be in a place where we can do that hard thinking and with smart people, like you all.
Ting Ting, are we allowed to ask you to answer that question? Seemingly because you've given this a lot of thought. Do you think we'd be in a different place today if it had been ratified? Is that unfair that I just did my podcaster thing? And you can just ignore me and be like, it's my party, Dahlia.
I'm trying not to freeze because when I'm around your voice, I somehow just get into this like deep learning state, you know? I literally had your podcast in my ear for the last 2 years. It's gotten me through life.
It's so funny because neither of my children have that reaction to my voice.
Mom. No, I think that there's pendulum swinging happening, but I also think that that's this incredibly hopeful feature of democracy. You know, like I was born in China. I moved here when I was 9, and it's a country that for a long time prevented women from giving birth, and here we have the opposite problem. But you know, certainly in an authoritarian regime, there isn't this pendulum swing, but it's all top down, right? Like you kind of aren't a full citizen, you don't have individual rights. So there's something really amazing about this back and forth. It's just completely off the rails right now. And I don't know if that's a feature of history or if that, for some reason, we've tapped into this weird portal where we're in this openly fascist environment, and it's some kind of tactic or tool that we need to get ourselves out of this weird portal, back into the rule of law, back into civility, and back into a conversation about modernism, equality, how we see each other, right? So I do have hope. I mean, I want to wrap it up so that we can all keep mingling out there. But I want to just ask you guys about kind of hope in the long term. I'll share one story. After Dobbs dropped, Katherine told me a personal story, which is that when she graduated from law school, that was when the Supreme Court handed down Bowers v. Harvard. Just bless you. A very horrendous decision by the Supreme Court that cherry-picked terrible laws to basically defend the criminalization of same-sex intimacy. And this year, her daughter, Maya, graduated from law school, and Dobbs dropped, and again, it's a horrendous decision, Supreme Court cherry-picking bad history, including laws from the 1800s that have to do with slavery, you know, to completely just obliterate women as, you know, like citizens. And so it took 17 years for Bowers to be overturned by Lawrence, and I think that the point of that story was to give me hope, and it did give me hope, you know? And so I want to give you guys the last kind of word on hope.
I got hope. I got some hope. I wrote a pink book. I got some hope. This goes back to something not only that Katherine opened with, but that Katherine actually said on my show when SB 8 went into effect, and I was out of my mind. I, at the time said, they're gonna nullify Roe. Like, this is so clear. And by the way, I was told by every single, anchor person on every news show I went on that I was hysterical and that, I was overreacting and that it was never gonna happen. Which is part of the problem, I think, is the gaslighting is very, very acute right now. And one of the things that Katherine said is the thing she opened with, which I think is really important, which is if you were a woman of color in Tennessee or Mississippi or Alabama, you never actually had rights under Roe v. Wade, and certainly after Hyde. And we just missed that if we weren't reckoning with that. And I really think that cracking open that you're describing, which is, I have absolutely in my own work seen what it is to cite to Michelle Goodwin and to Dorothy Roberts and to Peggy Cooper Davis, all of whom were warning us for decades that this was not only coming, but actually happening already if you were a person of color in this country. And so it's deeply humbling and depressing to realize that you don't know what you don't know, and then you know it. And then it changes everything. And so I think that what you have described, which is a kind of leveling of information and understanding. I mean, I've spent the last year trying to really understand what Peggy Cooper Davis was trying to tell us about the 14th Amendment, and nobody was sitting in that And so I just think there is massive power in understanding what is really happening and also what has always been happening. And the fact that we're not kind of ambling around in a fairy tale of exceptionalism and perfection and, you know, if I wear the RBG earrings, like we have meaningful gender equality, I think is a huge opportunity. And so maybe it's a version of what you're both saying, which is like these things happen in cycles, but they cannot happen in cycles if people don't know what's going on. And I really deeply believe that Dobbs helped an awful lot of people see what was going on.
I mean, it is an outrage that the courts, the Supreme Court in particular, do not see the denial of access to the full range of reproductive health care as a sex equality problem, right? And you stop people on the street and they're like, yeah, that's sex discrimination. It seems intuitively right. And so we now can make that argument in a way that we didn't before, because Roe versus Wade based a right to abortion, a constitutional right, at least against the criminalization of abortion. It never secured a right to abortion. In privacy, which has the unfortunate odor of the closet, right? Privacy is a terrible idea in order to set people free. And so we don't have to do that anymore. We wrote a amicus brief in the Pennsylvania Supreme Court. We're waiting for the decision from that court on how the denial of rights funding, Medicaid funding in Pennsylvania for abortion is a violation of sex equality under the Pennsylvania Equal Rights Amendment. And so the ERA becomes an opportunity to start thinking about equality in a much richer way than we have before. So I am hopeful, because I think the wrongness of Dobbs, the wrongness of this moment that we're in, is really clear to so many people. And they want new arguments, they want new values, they want new politics in order to take it on. And so that, to me, makes me very hopeful. And my students make me very hopeful. How many of you here are former students of mine? There's a bunch of you here. Yeah, which is great. And you guys are off doing just amazing things. It's so great to see you. These two just came up from DC just for this event and to meet with Professor Sanger at the law school this afternoon. We did an event last night on teaching the first year curriculum through abortion. I did torts, somebody else, Professor Sanger did contracts, Maeve Glass did property, Dave Posen did con law, and we had somebody else do CivPro and civil procedure. It was, and you were there, Abigail, and asked a terrific question. It was a great thing, and I wouldn't have done that if not for Dobbs. So we're becoming more creative, I think, more engaged, not taking, as you said, for granted a lot of the rights that we had before. And we're in this room, a lot of us, I think, tonight, because of that sense of both desperation and desire to come together and think critically about what we ought to do next. So that's what I'm hopeful about, is all this new stuff that we're starting to actually take seriously. The religious liberty work that we're doing. We're also at the Center for Gender and Sexuality Law doing all of this strategizing about bringing religious liberty claims to challenge these abortion statutes and the statutes that don't let queer and trans kids and gender nonconforming kids be themselves. The right wing can't have religious liberty, I'm sorry, to themselves. I bet there's a bunch of people of faith in this room who do not have homophobic and abortophobic views. And so that part to me is really exciting.
Great, so this is how you close out a Thursday, people, with hope. Thank you guys. I just want to thank you so much. I mean, it's a dangerous time. It really feels like such a treat, and also kind of like an organ donation to be talking to you guys. I'm like, oh, I can see. I want to thank Lilia, who's our administrative director, event to fruition. We would all be, eating hot dogs at an Applebee's right now without her. So thank you. And we are a small team with huge goals, and we are very much aided by our research assistants, our undergrads over here. The next generation is. here, so we want to thank them. And now I want to give the floor to our wonderful founding advisory board member, Wade Leek, to close us out. And then afterwards, we'll continue this party over there.
Thank you, everyone. Let's first again thank this panel. Amazing. I'm gonna do a lot of thanking, by the way. I really want to thank George and Milbank for hosting us. It's amazing. I'm an emotional guy, so I'll probably cry while I'm talking here. Just prepare yourselves. I also want to acknowledge, my husband's like, oh no. Okay. I also want to acknowledge the 3 of our advisory board members who are here tonight. And stand up, please. Liz Young, Marcy Sims, and Marianne Stack. So I know we want to close this, but I'm going to tell you a quick story about why this white guy from small town Utah is up here. When I was a Cub Scout in my little town in Utah, Utah was considering passing the ERA, and the Mormon church was very opposed to it. And I don't know why, probably religious problems we have, that the Mormons were so in control of those Cub Scouts. But anyway, I took a petition around our little town against the ERA. And there weren't that many non-Mormon, we call them non-Mormons, but there weren't many people not Mormon in our little town. But I knocked on the door of this one family, and I showed the petition, and the mother said, "Why are you doing this?" I'm like, I think I'm probably 10 or 11. And I just looked at her, and I just couldn't understand. I'm like, I'm doing God's work. Anyway, it's haunted me my entire life. And so several years ago, Liz brought me into some ERA work, and I actually got to tell Gloria Steinem that I'm sorry that I did that, and that's part of why I do this work, in addition to believing in it. Anyway, we just want to let you all know that I hope you see tonight how important this work is. The ERA work, the gender justice work. We're so lucky to have this at Columbia. And I should also tell you that with these amazing women I introduced in the advisory board, we left another organization, and we're just trying to figure out where do we take our ERA passion. And luckily, I'd done some work with Katherine and the center, and I said, let's take it to Columbia. And so we did. Katherine kindly, and the dean kindly said, okay, we can do this. But I really want you to understand that we currently have one employee, Ting. We need more. This work is so important. We need more support. So one of the things we are asking, obviously, is that please support us. Please support us any way you can. One of the special things we're doing tonight is the books are available to those who make a donation through the QR code, and Dahlia has kindly agreed to sign those books. So please help us with that, and please consider helping us in another way, any way you can. But we're just so happy you came, and we will continue to fight. We'll keep doing what we need to do. Thank you for coming, and please enjoy the evening. Milbank has kindly offered more food and desserts and drinks. So enjoy yourselves, but get on that QR code now. Bye.